Okay, time has come. The time has come. Good morning, good morning. It's not snowing. We have to, don't sit down. Sit down. Of course, I ought to make you stand up. The Hunt's anniversary is today. Anybody want to guess? You don't count. How many? Anybody want to guess which one it is? 69. Whew. You put up with on it. Bless your heart. That's awesome. It is really awesome. Okay. 21st day of December 2025, the first official day of winter. Official day. And it's getting warmer. This is going the wrong way, but I'll take the warmness. All right. This is our illusion for today. How many colors are there in this slide? How many say 3? How many say 4? There are 3. There's green, there's white, and there's pink. Now, some of you see a red grouping going up there. What's different about the ones that you see that are red?
Surrounded by green.
They're surrounded by green. The pink ones are surrounded by white. There is only green, pink, and white. The fact that the green is next to the pink changes the color. Now, that's all well and good, but what does that have to do with a Bible class? Well, how about if we do this? 1 Corinthians 15:3. You're familiar with it reading another way, but in the easy-to-read version, it says, "Don't be fooled. Bad friends will ruin good habits." The pink are fine as long as they're next to white. They put next to green and they change. And that's what happens sometimes when we surround ourselves with people that may not be good for our personality, our habits, or whatever. We say it's okay, I'm not going to change. But people see us differently by the company that we keep. And so it's important to do what is right and to surround ourselves with people that are going to build us up, that are going to assist us on our journey, and not try to change us into what they think is a better way. But anyway, let's go back to where we were. And we finished up last week and we looked at this verse in Romans. And I've kind of latched onto it because I think it sums up exactly what we're doing in this study on Job. Everything that was written in the past was written to teach us. Remember, we talked about the fact that Paul wrote this to a group of people that he hasn't met yet. He hasn't been to Rome yet. But he knows the condition that they're living in and that they're under great stress to conform to the people that are around them. And he's saying the things that were written to teach us. These things were written so that we could have hope. That hope comes from patience and endurance. That's what scriptures give us. And this is why we're taking this, at times, very difficult study in the book of Job. And it is a difficult book. It brings to mind things that are difficult to put into proper perspective. And like I said, having read through the book of Job several times, I have identified myself with, at times, just about all the characters. One time or another, I think, that's me. That's the way I would be. Another time, I'd look at somebody else and say, "Ooh, I might have said that, or I might have done that." So let's take a look at that. Last week, we talked about how great Job was. We learned that he was well off and that he was a strong believer in God, and it was in the patriarchal age, so there weren't priests or synagogues or any of that. The heads of the family were the priests. So Job even was concerned enough about his children that when they gathered together the next day, he'd call them in and he would offer sacrifice and pray that, and maybe, just maybe, they had done something wrong, and he wanted to make sure that God understood and would protect them. He was rich, he was well respected, and then it all fell apart. Satan took everything away that he had, all his wealth, all his family, his reputation, and he was just left with nothing of the possessions that he once held. And Satan was sure that would prove to God that the only reason that Job was even remotely obedient to him was because God had given him everything that he possessed. But what happened? Well, Job got up, tore his clothes, shaved his head, showed straight that. Probably the way we would have reacted in some way. He fell to the ground before God. Maybe we wouldn't have reacted that way. But the chapter ended with this. Even after all this, Job did not sin. He did not accuse God of doing anything wrong. So, in essence, God won. Because God said, go ahead, do what you want to do, but he will remain strong, and he did. Well, Satan doesn't give up. Satan, by his own nature, cannot accept that anybody would do anything just for the reason of doing something good. Satan's philosophy was, all things are what's in it for me. There's an underlying problem in that respect. Neil, I'm sorry. I have to get somebody. Some people might not know that I had a stroke earlier in the year. I was very blessed, very blessed. The only thing I lost was my peripheral vision on the left. So I can't see Neil raising his hand. So someone's going to have to point out. Neil, what were you going to say?
My observation is that for a lot of people, Satan would have been right.
Yes. That's what I talk about. Well, I look into it, and, if I lost everything, family, how would I have reacted? Would I have been? I'd like to think that I would have been the same way as Job, but that's tough. So God wins, but Satan doesn't. It's not over yet. Satan's still in the ball game. So what happens? We start chapter 2 this way. Then another day came for the angels to meet with the Lord. Satan was there. Satan joined them with a meeting of the Lord. Now, the Lord said to Satan, directly to Satan, where have you been? Well, that was the question he asked him before, and we talked about it last week. when Satan said, I've been here and there, and we can see that in the New Testament, exactly what they say in Peter. Peter says, watch out. The devil is always roaming around, seeing what he can get, who he can get, and what he can do. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is a good, faithful man. He respects God and refuses to do evil, and he is still faithful. And he is still faithful. Even though you asked me to let you destroy without reason everything he has. So there's Satan. Well, Satan always has an answer. And Satan said, skin for skin. What's skin for skin, by the way? It's not something you hear real often. In fact, if you do a word search, this is the only time in the scriptures that you see it. What does skin for skin mean? Hey, if I grab onto you, you're going to react. If I threaten you, you're going to react. And he said, skin for skin, a man will give anything he has to protect himself. I swear, if you attack, you notice that Satan says, if you attack his flesh and bones, he will curse you to your face. So the Lord said to Satan, all right, Job is in your hands. God doesn't enter us into some kind of race. God may remove his hand, as he did in this case. All right, Job is in your hands, but you are not allowed to kill him. So Satan gets a second bite at the apple, so to speak. So Satan left. He left the meeting with the Lord and gave Job painful sores all over his body, from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. Job sat in a pile of ashes where he was mourning and used a piece of broken pottery to scrape his sores. Now, we don't know exactly what disease that Job had. Some commentaries say it was a form of leprosy. It was all kinds of disease. It was a combination of everything, because it not only was sores and scars and itching and whatever. And why was Job sitting in a pile of ashes?
That was a sign of humility, wasn't
Well, he had been thrown ashes before as a sign of, deep mourning, but he'd gone out to the junk pile. He was out where the trash is, where the broken pottery was, where people threw their junk out, and he was in the ashes, and that was the only thing that he could get relief from, even at a little bit, scraping his arms and his whole body with broken pottery. He's in pain, he's in anguish, he's lost his family, and he's lost his possessions. Well, here comes his wife. Now, most of us married men, I'm sure the Hunts, like to think that our wife is an example of Proverbs 31. If you don't know what that is, look it up on your evening. Proverbs 31 is my wife. But apparently, Job's wife didn't fit into that mold. But she came out and said, are you still holding to your faith? Why don't you just curse God and die? That's the partner in your life's work, right? Just curse God and die.
Jesus lost everything too.
Yeah. We're assuming You get in trouble assuming, but we're assuming that 10 children were hers. They're gone. She's no longer the madam of the household with servants and wealth. So she goes out to the trash pile where Job's sitting and tells him, are you still clinging to that faith of yours? Apparently it's not hers, it's his. And said, curse God and die. Which in this part of the world, at this time in cursing God, well, we've read in the Bible later on, what happens when you cross God? Wrong type of fire? Touch the ark? Crossing God is probably a good way to terminate your existence on earth. And that's what she's telling him to do. Well, Job answered, you sound like one of those fools on the street corner. How can we accept all the good things that God gives us and not accept the problems? He's recognized that there are not all good things in the world. He goes on and he said, so even after all the things that happened to Job, he did not sin. Wins again. God wins again. He did not accuse God of anything wrong. So we would think that this is where God intervenes and makes everything right. Well, this is where Job's friends come in. Job's friends are a critical part to his existence. We all have friends. We all would like to think, well, we'd like to think that our wife is going to stand by us. But we also like to think that in an hour of need, or when we're the lowest point in our lives, our friends are going to come to our rescue. The people that we associate with, that we care for. Later on in this book, we'll see that Job had done a lot of great things, so he should have a lot of good friends. Well, he had 3 that we know of. Job's 3 friends heard about all the bad things that happened to him. Eliphaz came from Teman, Bildad from Shahu, Zophar from Naamah. Sorry about the pronunciation, it's the best I can do. They met together and went to comfort Job and show him their sympathy. That's the way friends react. They heard about what had happened to Job, and they got together and they were going to come and show him what real friends were. They were going to show him sympathy and help. Now, this is just an estimate from some theologians about exactly where they came from. You'll see the 3 friends coming from a great distance to comfort Job. The one on the bottom, there it is. Push the right button. Eliot, he'll be coming in later. We don't exactly know when he showed up, but he was there long enough to hear what the other friends were saying. But the 3 friends came from a great distance. They had heard about this incident and their friend Job, and they wanted to comfort him. We don't know how long Job had been in this condition, but his friends didn't even recognize him when they first saw him in the distance. They began to cry loudly, and they tore their clothes and threw dirt in the air over their heads to show how sad they were. Then they sat on the ground with Job for 7 days and 7 nights. They didn't hear a word because they didn't say a word. That's what friends do. There are times that I know that I've been in the hospital. Friends have come, not to give me words of wisdom or anything, but just to be there. In our congregation in New York, we had our first minister we hired right out of Bible school. And he did a great job. In fact, he is still in the ministry today. But one of the things that was unique about him is he hated hospitals. He was scared to death of hospitals. So if he showed up in your room, you knew that he came for you, because there was no way in the world that he would enter the hospital and else he was really concerned about an individual. And that's what these friends did. They came and they sat with Job. They didn't say anything. They sat with him. They were as upset as they thought Job was. Well, finally, we go to chapter 3. And in chapter 3, U-Haul or rent a car and drive down to us. So it took a while. And they sat there for 7 days and 7 nights. And Job speaks. Then Job opened his mouth and cursed the day he was born. He said, I wish the day I was born would be lost forever. I wish the night they said it's a boy had never happened. This sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Especially this time of year. How many know this whole movie by heart? Isn't this kind of similar? Didn't we hear some of the same words from here? What did George Bailey say? The world would be better off without me. I shouldn't have even been born. My life didn't mean anything. Kind of about what Job is saying. So we know, was George Bailey suicidal? This is where we answer from the audience. Was George Bailey suicidal? Yeah, that was the whole crux of the thing. He was getting ready to jump off the bridge when Clarence did. So what about Job? Was Job suicidal? Well, let's talk about this. You know, if I had died when I was born, I would be at peace now. I wish I were asleep and at rest. George Bailey was upset because he thought his life didn't mean anything. What's Job's problem? He's in pain. He isn't interested anymore necessarily in all that he's lost. He's in pain. He's sitting in an ash pile, scraping his skin with broken pottery. Jump ahead a couple verses, and this is what he says. I was afraid something like this would happen. What I feared most was happened. I cannot calm down or relax. I'm too upset. I knew this was going to happen. I know people like that. I know bad things are going to happen. I don't care how good things. This isn't going to last. in Matthew. We're familiar with this. What you should want most is God's kingdom and doing what he wants you to do. Then he will give you all these things, other things you need. So don't worry about tomorrow. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Tomorrow will have its own worries. I wish Job had known this. But the difference is that Job's sitting here, we're kind of, Monday morning quarterback, we can see the end game. We know what happens. Job doesn't. As far as Job knows, this is going to be his life forever. Scraping sores and being abandoned. Well, we ask the question again, is Job suicidal?
I think because he was so faithful, it may have crossed his mind, but I don't think he seriously considered it.
If he were truly suicidal, his wife had the answer.
Yeah. If he's suicidal, the wife had the answer. Yeah. He didn't say that he wished he was dead. He said he wished he was never born. He goes on to say, if you read through these, and we can't read all of it, we haven't got the time, but he talks about the fact that even bad people die and they're at rest. He said, I'm a good person, and if I could die, I would be at rest. But he doesn't ever talk about taking his own life. You know the definition for suicide, don't you? It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And like I said, we know that this is a temporary problem for Job. But 99% of our issues in our life are temporary problems. In fact, as a good Christian, the reward is greater than anything we can face here. But there's a movement going around, kind of like the movement of abortion. There's people that say, my life, my death, my choice. And they go to the book of Job and they pull out verses like this one that say we need to take charge of our bodies. We need to do what's good for us. In fact, they go to this scripture that Job says in chapter 3, why must a suffering person continue to live? Why let anyone live such a bitter life? Such people want to die, but death does not come. They search for death more than a hidden treasure. They would be happy to find their grave. They would rejoice to find their tomb. But God keeps their future a secret and builds a wall around them to protect them. We all know of people with terminal diseases that we anguish over watching the suffering that they go through. I don't know how many people here know about Libby, the young girl who has a strange disease. I know her grandfather. Yeah. She just took a turn for the worse. Here is a teenage girl which has a disease which is stumping the doctors, and she's suffering with it. And we wonder, why is this happening? We all have this anguish, and Job feels the same way, but some people take this in a different manner. It's called death with dignity. Now, I'm not talking about a living will that says, I don't want any mechanical resuscitation and stuff like that, or somebody that says, I'm not going to take any more treatment, I'm just let things go. That's not what we're talking about. This is people that are actively seeking legislation to allow assisted suicide, either by a medical team or yourself. And the thing that's scary, and this isn't an up-to-date map, but currently there are 8 states that this is legal. There are 11 more states which are considering legislation to put this in place. It's assisted suicide. Or, as some people say, it is self-death, self-murder. I'm taking a life. Suicide is mentioned in the Bible. There are 8 instances of someone taking their life in the Bible. Never is it sanctioned by God. And it hasn't changed here. Job was not thinking suicide. Job was just in a condition that was very, very difficult. And if you just go over a couple of books in the scripture, you'll see Ecclesiastics, and it puts it this way. In 1911, I also saw other things in this life that were not fair. The fastest runner does not always win the race. The strongest soldier does not always win the battle. Wise people don't always get the food. Smart people don't always get the wealth. Educated people don't always get the praise they deserve. When the time comes, bad things can happen to anyone. And this is what we're looking at in the book of Job. Satan has put these tests to this individual. And so far, he's on the brink. But Job was not suicidal. Now back to Job and his friends, because this is where we step up. They start to speak. Eliphaz is the first one. We kind of assume that he appears to be the oldest one. He appears to be the leader of the group. And he speaks first. I love this part. I must say something. Would it upset you if I speak? Very polite. Job, you have taught many people. You encouraged those who were ready to quit. Your words helped those who were ready to fall. You gave strength to those who could not stand by themselves. That's a pretty good, that's where a friend comes from, right? Tells you, oh, let me speak. I'll tell you, you've done a great job. But now, trouble comes to you, and you are discouraged. Trouble hits you, and you are upset. One of the books that I use to study for this is a book called So It All Comes. It's a book written by a preacher out of Texas whose name was W.T. Hamilton. I had the privilege of meeting him once. Fine individual. His father-in-law was Gus Nichols. His son is a preacher, still preaching in Memphis. He wrote this book, and it was based on thoughts about the book of Job. 3/4 of the way through writing this book, he found he had terminal cancer. Nothing could be done. And he finished the book. Unfortunately, the book is out of print, but it's a very inspiring book about the strength that it takes to live life and how quickly we are sometimes to throw up our hands and quit. And maybe not being suicidal, but we quit. We don't look for answers. in the strength that God's Word can give us. We're just about out of time, at least that I've prepared for this week. But next week is going to be interesting because next week, the friends take a different turn. See, they're seeing their friend in all this pain and anguish, and Job says, I've done nothing wrong. Why am I suffering? Well, the conventional thinking was, and guess what? In a lot of cases, it's still the thinking. If you're suffering from something that we can't really pinpoint, whose fault is it? There must be a reason. People don't suffer for no reason at all. Our time's running out. I haven't got much more planned. See you next week. Thank you.